In this video, I'm going to show you the last step to the amortization project, which is putting the if statements in. So part of the problem is if we were to change this loan to a 1-year monthly loan, then this loan would only go for 12 payments. And if I go down to the 12th payment, it does pay off. But the problem is it has all this stuff below it, all these negative numbers. They don't need to be there. It looks like these payments continue, and obviously this thing's paid off. The balance is 0. So we know that the loan is over, so we won't continue paying it. What I'm going to show you real quick is how to write a couple if statements and show you the logic in what these if statements would be. So first of all, an if statement has 3 parts. It has the logical test, which basically says, what do we want to look at? And that is a yes/no question. So you're going to put something in there. If it's true, it'll do one thing. If it's false, it'll do the other thing. So essentially what I want to check is to see if this thing is paid off. Now, to keep me from scrolling up and down, I'm going to change it to 1 year quarterly. And that way I can see that this loan is paid off right there at the end of the 4th year. So the first cell that needs to be blank would be this one. So that cell needs to be blank. So what I need to do is I need to write an if statement in here. Now, that's not to say that this formula that's already there is wrong. That formula is actually right, but it's only part of the if statement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write an if statement in front of this. I put it after the equal sign. And what I want to test, the way I know this needs to be blank is because my previous ending balance is 0. So if I check this to see if it's, and a lot of people would say if it is equal to 0, if I test it like that, the problem is they're not always equal to 0. Now, depending on how you write this logic, you could make it equal to 0. There's tons of ways to write this, but I want to point out one way in this video. So part of what I'm going to look for is this isn't exactly 0 all the time. So one way that I could do it is say if it is less than 0. Now, if it is less than 0, then what I want to do is I want to make it blank. Now, don't write the word blank, but just as an emphasis, I want to show you that what I want it to say is if it's less than 0, make this cell blank. The way that you make it blank in Excel is to do double quotes. So it's a set of double quotes. And make sure you're doing the one with 2 in each one, not the single quotes. All right, so we do that, and that would make, if this is less than 0, it'll make this blank. You notice this one is actually equal to 0, so I can actually make it less than or equal to 0. So if it's less than or equal to 0, this would be blank. Now this ends up being blank. Now if I copy it all the way down, let's see if it works. Now, for those of you that don't know, a shortcut to copying a formula all the way down in Excel, I already have formulas written all the way down to row 370, which is actually period number 360. So if I hold Control and just arrow down to show you, I actually have formulas all the way down to row 370. Well, actually, first of all, I need to copy it up. So I'm going to copy it up only to row 2. And then to copy it all the way down, I'm going to go to the bottom right and double click this. And when I double click it, it copies it all the way to the bottom. And you can see that it made that whole row blank. Now, that's not that there's no formula there. The formula is just there. It just sees that all of these are less than or equal to 0, so it makes it blank. Don't stop right there because you need to make the rest of these blank. A couple things real quick before we go on. I wrote the very first version of this in row 12, which is row 2 of the table. I didn't have to write it in row 1. Now you could, but you got to figure if you're using this, you need at least 1 row. Part of the problem with writing it to row 1, if you were to copy it all the way to row 1, is it actually checks this word ending balance to see if it's less than 0, and that's why it throws up that value error. Only write the formula in the second row of your table, which is row 12. Now, we're not quite done yet. Let's think about what would make this column blank, and actually it'll work for the rest of these. So this formula is actually correct, but what I want to say is if, and there's all kinds of ways I could write this. The easiest way to write it is to say if the period number is blank, then leave this one blank. Otherwise, do this ending formula here. So F11 was the formula that was there already. So I said if A12, which is the period number, so if the period number is blank, then go ahead and leave this blank. However, if the period number has a number in it, then give me what's in F11. So I'm going to copy that all the way down. And it looks like it kind of worked, but there must be some sort of issue now with the second row. So what we could do is check it and see what happened. As I'm going through my table, I notice the very first cell that becomes an error is this one. So if I click on that and look, well, the reason this is an error is because this cell is blank. But if you think about it, that's fine because I want this cell to be blank anyway. So actually, if I go ahead and continue writing this same logic, so this part right here, everything from the I and the if to the second comma, if I write that in the rest of these columns, then everything will work and will go blank and it won't give me all those errors. Okay, so we're not quite done yet, but let's take this piece. I'm going to copy everything from the I and the if to the second comma. I'm going to do Control C. Now hit Escape so you don't change that formula. Go to the next cell and insert that same logic in here. Now, make sure you insert it between the equals and the B8. So Control V, and it inserts it in there. So I didn't change the formula that's there, this B8. All I did was put this if logic in front of it. I'm going to hit enter there. I'm going to copy it down. And this one went blank also. I'm going to do the same thing here. Between the equal sign and the rest of this formula, I'm going to Control V, which is the same logic that we wrote in the column B. Hit enter. Now you don't have to copy this down every time. We can copy it all down at once, but just for emphasis, I'm copying it down so you can see that it actually got rid of that error statement. So I pasted this one in front of that formula as well. Copy that down. I'm going to paste this one in front of that formula as well. Hit enter. And now I'm going to copy that down. And you notice that's steadily been getting rid of our errors, and it's actually making it blank. So now we're almost done, except you notice that it makes one row blank, but not the next row. So now we got to figure out what's wrong with that. Well, if you scroll down here, arrow down to the first error that you get, we need to check and see what's wrong with this logic. So when I look and see what's wrong with that logic, what this is saying is if the previous ending balance is less than or equal to 0, then make this blank. Well, when I look at it, you might look at that and say, well, it is 0, it's blank. So the way that Excel reads it is text, but when we're looking at it, we're thinking it's a 0. What we need to do is add just a little additional piece on here that checks to see if it is blank. There's a number of ways you can do this. You can do this with an OR statement. You could say if F15 is less than or equal to 0, or if it's blank. You can do it a number of ways, but let me show you one way to handle it. One way to handle it is with an in function. So if you go in front of the F15 and put in an in, and put just the F15 inside that function, what it's going to do is convert F15 into a number. So it converts this cell from blank to 0. And now it'll work. So I'll copy that up. And now I'll copy that all the way down, and it looks like it works now. One little issue here that is not apparent because of the numbers I'm using, but you definitely need to handle, is you might notice that this is actually a negative 0.00. Technically, this is slightly negative. You see how it's very, very small, but it's negative? Well, if we end up with a situation in which it's slightly positive, then this thing will go one additional row. Okay, so what I ended up doing here is I actually changed the purchase price to $360,002. And then when I look at the end of the fourth year here, it looks like my payment goes to zero. Well, remember, what it was before was a negative zero, and therefore it was slightly negative. Well, this zero is actually slightly positive. If I increase the number of decimal places, you can see that it is just slightly positive. So because it is slightly positive, I need to revisit my logic here in column A. So look at what our logic says. Our logic says if that ending balance is less than or equal to zero. Well, technically right now it's not less than or equal to zero. It's slightly positive. So a little trick that I know that you can use to handle that is instead of using less than zero, let's use less than half of a penny. Because if it's less than half a penny, it is essentially zero. Even if due to all of the rounding, it's just slightly positive. Use that logic, now it'll work. I'm going to copy this up. So this is the formula I have in there. And what I'm going to do, you notice the in parenthesis F11 close parenthesis less than or equal to 0.005. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit enter on that, and I'm going to copy that all the way down. And that handles this situation in case it's slightly positive. Now, I didn't change any of the other formulas, but let me go ahead and show you all the formulas. These are in row 12. So that's A12. There's B12. There's C12. There's D12. E12. And F12. So you can see the formulas in the end of those are all the same. After you get this in there, highlight that whole row, just row 2, and copy this down. Make sure it goes all the way down to row 370. Now you notice even in 370, there's that formula again. Once you put those if statements in, you'll notice you can change this to, let's say, 30 years monthly, and it goes all the way to 360. I could change it to 1 year monthly, and it'll go to row 12 and stop. I can change it to 2 years quarterly, and it'll go to 8 and stop. So it actually will adjust for anything you put into those input cells at the top, B1, 2, 3, 4.